We're here tonight with Jazz at Jazz Live with Benny Green. Benny, thanks for joining us tonight on Jazz Live.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's just start it one more time. You were a little hot coming in.
We're here at Jazz Live tonight with Benny Green. Benny, thanks for being with us tonight at Jazz Live.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you.
So can you tell us a little bit about your band that you brought in tonight with us and the players and your history with them?
Sure. Well, my history with them is brief and scarce, but looking forward to it being a bountiful one as of here and now. I'm playing with a very fine bassist, Paul Keller, who makes his home in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Wonderful drummer, Kevin Canner, who lives in the Los Angeles area. Paul, I first met, I would say about 12 years ago, around 95. He was working with Diana Krall and Russell Malone in Diana's trio. And I had my own trio, and we were playing a double bill across Canada. I really had a chance to listen to him play. He's a hard swinger. And Kevin, I got to hear with a dear friend of mine, one of my favorite pianists in the whole world, favorite people, love him to pieces, Gerald Clayton. I've heard Kevin play in Gerald's trio, along with the bassist Dan Lutz. And I had the pleasure of playing with Kevin and Dan, along with the vocalist Belinda Underwood, a few weekends ago at Steamers in Fullerton, and Kevin's swinging. So it's such a joy to get to play with them. But it's not like a situation where we're like a rehearsed touring band. So the beautiful thing is hopefully that we can just have a good time easing into playing with one another and just sharing this with the audience, in the moment as it's happening.
So the repertoire that you're playing these days, like in this show and some your recent shows, are you focusing on anything in particular? Any special tunes, or working on some other things? Or is there any special tunes that you're picking out for the sets?
I hope they're all special in one way or another. I guess I think I've been playing a lot of standard American popular songs and jazz tunes. I hadn't really thought of it as a concept per se, other than just playing good songs. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, what's your process for putting together a set list like for tonight's show?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I would want to start with something that I felt in some way comfortable about sharing with the audience. Whether or not it would be prodigious in nature. Just it's something that I felt comfortable and happy and warm, and like it's a truthful environment, to be able to share that with an audience, for us to get a chance to acclimate, if I'm going to say that, to one another. So yeah, and maybe perhaps not too fast or too slow. And I say perhaps because no rules, right?
Right.
But yeah, perhaps maybe something that's going to be fairly groovy, we hope, and then take it from there. Just try to have some contrast, and it's nice when you are working together with a group of musicians, or even one other musician, but having a chance to play together on a more regular basis and develop a sense of trust with one another. Then you really find yourself taking more and more liberties, and really cool, magical things can happen. So the beautiful thing is, we know just from experience of being in those situations where you do have a sort of familial setting of a band, rehearsed touring unit, that in the moment that we're together here, even if this is not a regular situation for the three of us musicians, hopefully we have an opportunity to really tune into one another, and let the magic flow. Because there's a tendency to want to sort of force such a thing when it's not a rehearsed unit. And beautiful thing is, I think just through experience, all three of us know that it's already there if you don't try to make it happen, if you just let it happen.
Based on some of your recent recordings and your associations over the years, you seem to like to keep things small where you work. Trio, duo, a lot of solo work. Is that something by choice? Is that a thing that you choose to do?
Yes, wow, very astute observation, if I may say. I'm not trying to be facetious at all, seriously. Yeah, I do. I think, when there's a player that I like listening to, often I enjoy listening to them in a very stark setting so you can just really feel them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I love hearing people play solo, like, I understand Sonny Rollins has made some solo recordings I'd like to hear. I think there's one that he did live in New York years ago. So, that's what, and I also enjoy hearing saxophone with bass and drums. Listening to this great Joe Henderson record with Rufus Reid and Al Foster from 1991. Listening to it a couple of evenings ago, just tremendous. Yeah. So, and then there's something really intimate about like a duo situation, you know, which I've been enjoying the last few years with Russell Malone. And then of course with solo, there's no one else up there, and I mean, you can only leave with so much silence, you know, so it's a beautiful challenge. It's also so very liberating because there's no one to turn to have to cue if you want to do something spontaneously that wasn't the way you played it the last time. Sorry, audience and engineer, I think I wandered off mic there for a moment. Okay.
Perfectly on cue there.
Oh, okay.
So let's talk then a little bit about your recent association with Russell Malone. What is it about Russell that clicks with you guys? So and especially you. What's your take?
Oh, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that, although in truth, you know, he's a human being and an artist, and so I wouldn't want to, you know, confine him by any terms. You know, it's just his wonderful humanity and musicality. But first thing that comes to mind for whatever reason when you ask me that is his time. Russell's time is like an old man. I mean, it's very rare to find that. That's all I can really say. You know, I've played with two of the strongest time players. I've played with the hardest swinging bassist and the hardest swinging drummer in the history of jazz, Ray Brown and Art Blakey. So I may never be on their level, but I can say from experience I've felt it. I've been to the mountaintop in terms of feeling how good that depth of support can feel from the rhythm section. And Russell Malone has that kind of time. There's so much more. You know, he loves the piano and he loves vocalists, so there's not a combative situation between the two stringed instruments at all, but he really, you know, enjoys laying down a groove. And I remember I read an interview with Horace Silver, maybe some of our listeners also read it. I think Len Lyons did it years ago. But Horace Silver was asked something along the lines of what he felt it took to be a good comper, a good accompanist. And Horace said, well, you know, you can't just be sitting there waiting for your turn to play your solo. You have to actually enjoy laying down a groove behind the soloist. So, you know, Russell has that as well. He really takes great pleasure in making people sound superb.
I know that you're a student of jazz. You're someone who gets into not only the feel and playing, but also the history of jazz and studying jazz. And as you said, you've played with, you know, two of the greats in jazz, with Art Blakey and Ray Brown. Did you, when you got into those bands, let's take Art Blakey.
Among others, I wasn't trying to slight, you know, other great mentors I've had, but yeah.
Yeah, we could mention
context.
Yeah, we could mention a bunch that you played with, which is great. When you got into those bands, did you know about the pianist that sat in the seat before you?
Come on, are you kidding? Most definitely.
What was it like to come in and sit in, you know, take the seat of like Gene Harris, who was with Ray Brown, who was with Art before you were in there?
Most immediately before me was Donald Brown. Before him was Mulgrew Miller. Before him was Johnny O'Neill. Before him was Donald Brown the first time, and before that was James Williams.
So did you study like what they brought to the band and then
listen, let me tell you, it was my absolute, when I was 19 years old, I was living in Berkeley, California, it was my absolute undeniable dedication to play with Art Blakey. You know, and I just knew I had to. So I moved to New York in the spring of 1982, and I would just go hear the band as much as I could. I got all their recordings. I already had, you know, many of them up to date, but I would just stay abreast of the repertoire and practice the tunes. And when I finally got to sit in with Art for the first time, his pianist Johnny O'Neill introduced us, and Art was kind enough to let me sit in with him at the Blue Note in New York in I want to say February of '83, just like a couple months before I joined Betty Carter. Because I knew all his repertoire, they called me up. Art just toward the end of the set he was playing, and Johnny O'Neill got up from the piano and he motioned to me. He said, "Art wants you to play," and he said, "It's Miss BC." So it was a good thing that I knew all the songs in the repertoire, because Miss BC, after a drum introduction, it starts with a rhythm section introduction. I had to come right in and know what I was doing, So I don't know how well I played, and I wouldn't make any claims to how well I played that evening, but at least the fact that I knew his music, I guess that let him, know why I'd been hanging out so much, and that I really meant it in terms of my sincerity of wanting a chance to play with him. And he gave me the most beautiful affirmation afterwards. He said, "Keep doing what you're doing. I'm going to need you one day." So that's all I needed to hear. And actually, so it's kind of relevant to this. I had an opportunity to join the Messengers prematurely, I could say, the night before my first night actually working with Betty Carter. So just to explain that, Art Blakey's pianist Johnny O'Neill was stranded in Detroit and called me a couple hours before the band had a gig in New York. He said, "Could you fill in tonight?" I said, "I'd love to, but could you please call Art first and just make sure it's cool with him? I don't want to just be thrown upon him if that's not what he's feeling, And I said, "Please let me know what he says." And so Johnny called me back and said, "Art said he'd love to have you." So I went to this club, which is now gone, called McKell's on Columbus and 97th in New York, and I played that night with the Messengers. And at the end of the night, I guess simply because Johnny O'Neill had maybe missed a few gigs at that point, Art's wife, when she paid me, asked me if I'd like to join the band. And I knew, first of all, I told her, I said, "This is what I've always wanted, this is why I moved to New York, but Betty Carter has been rehearsing with me, and she's hired me, she's given me the gig in her band, and so I'm going to start with her tomorrow in Buffalo." I said, "But thank you." And she's like, "Well, okay." She kind of looked at me like, "You're turning down the Jazz Messengers?" But, I'm so thankful, because the truth of the matter is, the only reason probably in hindsight they were offering me, or Art's wife was offering me the gig, was probably to cover for Johnny O'Neill until he could come back, simply because I knew the repertoire. So I really wasn't, those guys was like, I didn't feel like I was really on their level. But, so yeah, just someone to kind of cover the chair, the piano chair. But had I done that, I would have really, really blown it with Betty. And I would have gotten fired from the Messengers once Johnny O'Neill could come back. My name would have been mud in New York. Instead, I got to work with Betty Carter for 4 years, and she helped me so much, inspired me. And then Art Blakey offered me the gig, and Betty, she gave me her blessing, and so I got to play with Art afterwards. So I'm glad I wasn't like the dog with the bone in his mouth that drops it for the reflection he sees in the lake.
Good choice.
Right on. I'm grateful, believe me.
It sounds like it, and I can understand. So, as you look at this time, do you do any thinking about jazz as an art form and the business from kind of outside, and looking at this point in history of jazz? Are there any things about jazz right now that you think are going to be looked on as good or bad, in the industry right now?
Are going to be? You mean historically, sort of?
Yeah. So you see, so someone who is into jazz and studies jazz may have something that happened, the birth of fusion or something has changed things. But is there any things? Are there any threads in jazz right now?
New trend.
Yeah.
Gee, I wouldn't know what to say. My first instinct is that anything specific I would say would be sort of denying just the vast diversity that we have. But I definitely feel like just there's so much more of what's called world elements in all music now. Just basically cultures, musical cultures. With representing very ancient musical traditions are more coming together, which I think is so great. And it's also really beautiful to hear something that's very pure, hear a native music that's played, authentically. I was just listening to some Koto music yesterday.
It seems amazing how much improvisation is in these other musics, even without even thinking of jazz. That there's a lot of that, and that's kind of a similarity that brings kind of American jazz to the world jazz too. It seems like.
I didn't quite understand.
Well, that all of these indigenous musics seem to have an element of improvisation in them.
Right on.
And that seems to be something that's not necessarily just jazz's, the American art form of jazz's contribution. That improvisation is in a lot of these other things too. It's just an observation. And maybe it's...
No, I hear you, man. Yeah, it's really, once we get past the titles, like looking at the person's skin pigment or something, it creates a sense of division where there really isn't one. It's all music. Like I don't know. I haven't researched world music enough to make such a conclusive or all-encompassing statement to say every, but I believe probably every culture has its form of something that feels kind of bluesy to it, right? It's like there's a cry there that's just so primal. And I really feel that that's something that people, all cultures, all generations, all financial classes, if you will, can relate to feeling a sense of sorrow. So I feel like if an artist can somehow tap into that honestly, just their own sense of it, it really doesn't matter if it's progressive or retrogressive or a lot of notes or a few notes or loud or soft, but if it's real, if you mean it, and you tap into these emotions, that we're living, I feel like it creates a bridge of honesty that people can feel, and so what got me off on this tangent?
I did, I think.
Yeah.
I think my big, huge question did there. But so to kind of wind up, can you give us a feel for what some of your projects are that you're working on? And I guess 2004 was your last disc under your name. What other things have you got coming up?
I haven't really been very project-oriented in my thinking as of late. But no, I just... a colleague of mine actually just telephoned me just before I left for our sound check this afternoon, who I used to play with in the Jazz Messengers, Javon Jackson, tenor player, and we played some on the West Coast last year, and we talked about maybe trying to play some performances as a quartet, which I really enjoyed doing. So we talked about that a little bit, and there's a project with horns which I'm really quite excited about next year, and I don't mean to sound in any way cryptic nor pompous, but I honestly I can't, I'm not sure I can contractually disclose what it is, but it's actually a very exciting project for me in a quintet setting. So I'm really stoked about that, to tell you the truth, and it'll give me an opportunity to do some writing. So that'll be a great challenge and an inspiration to me, needless to say.
Well, best of luck with that and all the future projects. Thanks for joining us tonight on Jazz Live.
Oh, what a great pleasure. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing for the music. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Let's do it again.
Okay. Oh, were you supposed to tape that? Oh, this is a sound check.
I'm sorry, I didn't hit record.
That sounded a little bit. It sounded like this is jazz. I wasn't trying to be.
Do
Should
one
I do it
more time.
again?
Yeah,
Yeah.
one more
Okay.
time.
Sorry. It just came out that way. I wasn't thinking that.
That's okay.
I wasn't trying to be all Jimmy Dean. Okay, here we go. Hi, this is Benny Green, and great radio is made possible by listeners like you. This is Jazz 88.3.